If it's all right, it might make sense. Oh, Counselor Bach, thank you. We've been joined by Counselor Bach.
Counselor Edwards, I'm going to be in transit for part of this, so I'll probably just let you know when I am not available for asking questions and stuff, but I'll be listening throughout.
Very well, thank you.
Deputy Miller's here, Boston Police Criminal Investigations Division.
Excellent. All right, so it looks like we have everybody. Very well then, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It's Friday, June 19th, Juneteenth, and we are here today for a virtual working session on Docket 0683, Ordinance Banning Facial Recognition Technology in Boston. This matter was sponsored by Councilors Wu and Councilors Wu and Arroyo, and was referred to the committee on May 6, 2020. The committee held a public hearing on June 9th and heard testimony from the Boston Police Commissioner, William Gross, members of the ACLU Massachusetts, the Student Immigrant Movement, the Boston Teachers Union, and many other organizations and individuals. At the hearing, the committee learned that the Boston Police Department does not use facial recognition technology because it is not reliable and does not meet the standards of Boston Police Department. The committee also discussed and heard testimony about the inaccuracies of facial recognition technology and discriminatory tendencies. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order, we're modifying how we're going to meet in this particular working session. He has modified the open meeting law, which allows us to meet via Zoom. This enables the City Council to continue its responsibilities. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8/RCN82/Verizon1964. For public testimony, written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov. and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. If enacted, the docket would 0683 would ban the use of facial surveillance by the City of Boston or any official in the City of Boston. The proposal would also prohibit entering into agreements to obtain facial surveillance from third parties. The purpose of this working session is to discuss specific language changes to the docket. I will introduce my colleagues in order of arrival for any opening remarks, and then I will allow for us to walk through amendments and suggestions. We've been joined by Kade from the ACLU, who will be discussing some amendments, and we've also been joined by several members of the Boston Police Department, who will be discussing amendments or representing the department's reaction to amendments, I assume, for the ordinance, and also expressing support or not. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to my colleagues if they have any opening remarks. I see we've been joined by Councilor Janey. And with that, I will turn it over to Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really want to thank you, actually, because I know you've had a long day already with your working session on the Fair Housing Ordinance. And so this is really in an effort to make sure that everyone's on the same page and has conversation about the specific language before heading into the last meeting of the month. And I'm grateful for everyone's time and efforts. This has been a long process of engaging with the coalition and community over many years. I know Commissioner Gross was then serving in his role as Chief of Police when we first started talking about surveillance at the City Council hearing several years ago. And so it's been nice to get to the point where we're talking about the actual legislative language. So thank you to everyone involved. I know we just have a few small technical edits that have been submitted to the chair, and feeling very good about the shape of the language overall. Thank you.
Counselor, actually, I have a letter to be read into the record from Counselor Asabi George, if I may. I will go ahead and turn to that letter. To the Committee on Government Operations, please be advised that I will be absent from today's working session on docket 0683 regarding the ordinance banning facial recognition technology. I'm traveling with my family and will not have enough service to reliably tune in virtually. I will review the recording of the working session. Despite my absence, I would like to offer my continued support of this ordinance. From our last hearing, I'm hopeful that this session will strengthen the language in section B2 to ensure that it doesn't include vague language that might allow face surveillance technology to be directly or indirectly utilized. It is clear that this technology is highly biased and problematic. Even if it worked, allowing this technology in Boston would be a great threat to democracy, to privacy, and to living in a free society. Thank you, Anissa Sabi George, City Councilor at Large. I'll turn it over then to Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and to the makers for their work on this initiative. And thank you to the Boston Police for being here and to the advocates as well. Looking forward to hearing more from the police and the advocates and my colleagues. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Breadon.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I'm very happy to be here to listen to the discussion. I think this is a huge step forward, and I commend all the advocates and thank the police department for their constructive participation in this process. And I look forward to moving this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too would like to specifically thank you for your quick work on this, but most specifically the lead sponsors, Councilors Wu and Arroyo. I am proud to support this ordinance. It is needed. It is an important step, as mentioned this morning, as we talk about sort of the way that we approach all aspects of public safety and all aspects of our society. This is an important, fair, ordinance that will strengthen public safety and trust in the city of Boston. So I'm proud to support it. Grateful for the advocates, for their leadership, grateful for all members of the administration who've come, and look forward to hammering out any technical edits, and then look forward to a quick vote, hopefully very, very shortly. So well done, everybody. Thanks.
Councilor Mejia.
Hi, yes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the makers. No, I'm just joking. Thank you. I'm happy to be here and engage in this conversation. I do believe that we need to really be clear about the language and how we formulate the ordinance so that there is no room for wiggle room, if you will, because I think that sometimes things get lost in translation, and unless we're really deliberate and intentional about what it is that we're proposing, it's going to be left to interpretation. And if we're serious about banning facial recognition, this needs to not just be here within the Boston Police Department, but I'm hoping that we can also include language around private and city and other BHA and other spaces where these things may pop up that have nothing to do with law enforcement. Thank you.
Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to again thank the makers and also not just my colleagues, but I know the ACLU has been very involved in this and a number of other advocates. And I'll just repeat what I said before, which is at our last hearing on this, which is that I really think we have a society that has a tendency to get ahead of itself technologically, where it becomes possible to do something and then we just start doing it. And then sort of by the time we ask whether it makes sense for us to be doing it, the horse has left the barn. And I think that when it comes to a democratic society and a society built on trust, making sure that you don't default to kind of new methods of surveillance just because they're available is so important. And we can have more than a sort of worse quality of life if we miss this boat. Like we can really erode the kind of community that we live in. So it's very important to me. I'm a strong supporter of this legislation and looking forward to the working session work ahead. And I'll also just note, I will be a little bit in and out because I'll be in transit, but I'll be listening throughout the whole thing. So thank you so much.
Councilor Janey.
Hey, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
You're good to go.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone as well for the work, particularly the makers. I've been part of many of those conversations, working with Councilor Wu and Councilor Arroyo, as well as many of the advocates in this space. I think this is really important, this legislation. I think it seems that we're almost at the finish line. And so I'd be really interested in understanding just what these final, the amended language is, because I'm hopeful that we can move this through quickly. So thank you, Chairwoman, for your leadership, and certainly to the makers and all of the advocates in this space. Thank you.
Thank you. I will conclude with some small remarks unless there's another counselor that's joined us. I don't see. So I'll just simply say I'm excited to have this conversation, to go through the direct edits. Just letting the folks know this is a working session. So we will be talking specifically about the language. What I've encouraged in prior working sessions that we just had is for, as we go through the sections and as we go through the conversation, if you have a comment on specific language, to raise your hand, blue hand on the app, so I know to call on you. And I ask that you direct your comments to this section. Expressions of support or expressions of opposition are usually reserved for the hearing, but we're here to get a lot of work done. And I'm trying to keep it down within 2 hours to get the work done. I do know we've been joined, and I'm okay with there's actually two sets of amendments that I have received in advance. I received amendments from Councilor Arroyo, which was changing the title and also moving the effective date to a different section. And then I have 3 amendments that will be represented by Kade from the ACLU. I wasn't sure if there's been any amendments or suggestions or concerns from the BPD. We'd also add.
Good afternoon, it's Deputy Miller.
Hi, Deputy.
How are you? Thank you for having me here and being part of this process. I just want to speak about the software, the brief cam,
okay,
which is components that will be of great value to us, but we're also recognizing the problems with facial recognition. And my understanding is the license allows us to turn that portion off. And I just wanted to go over briefly of 2 of the components we found valuable. One would be the object recognition portion of it that allows our detectives to flag a particular vehicle or article of clothing that they can track through the system. Again, we would not be using the facial recognition on that, the component of that. Another one would be the video summary. That's a component that would give us the ability as detectives to minimize the lengths of the video, essentially erasing video with no movement. That would expedite the process and save both time and money for the city of Boston, the department. An example of that would be video surveillance behind a bank. Instead of watching 8 hours of surveillance video where 7.5 hours of it are dead, it could condense it to 30 minutes of video they could review. But again, we would not be using it for facial recognition. And I just want to make that very clear.
Do you need amendments in this particular ordinance in order for those things to be accessible to you?
Yeah, it's a ban on everything.
Yes, from our view, it's a little bit vague. It kind of encompasses everything under section 2. We'd look for amendments in that area to allow us to use components of the brief cam.
Okay.
Excluding facial recognition.
So I apologize, Superintendent Miller?
Deputy Superintendent? Thank you for the promotion, though.
I apologize. I didn't get the titles in advance. I'd rather give you a higher one than a lower one. Is it deputy? I'm so sorry.
Sorry, ma'am. It's Deputy Superintendent Miller, and I have the Criminal Investigations Division, which oversees homicide, the drug control unit, major cases, and the district detectives.
Okay. So what I will do is there's 3 then components for amendments that we're going to have. And so we will discuss the procedural kind of amendments. I will check with all 3 groups, my counselors, if they have any questions about it. Then move on to the 3 substantive from the EFF represented by Kade from the ACLU. And then we'll go on to the amendments from the BPD.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Welcome. All right, then. So I believe the amendments from Councilor Arroyo amounted to just simply moving the language from the title from one of the whereases over to the bottom, putting in a section and changing the title to ordinance banning face surveillance technology versus recognition. That was it. So those are the 2. I think as he and Councilor Wu are the lead sponsors. I don't know that is there any issue. It doesn't change substantively the actual ordinance. So very quick, if maybe raise your hand if you have an issue with that. Otherwise, we can move on to substantive edits. Seeing no hands, then let's go on to the 3 substantive edits. Kade, do you want to lead that conversation?
Yes, thank you, Counselor. So our colleagues at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, in their letter to the committee, suggested 3 specific ways that the committee could make small tweaks to strengthen the language to be sure that there are no loopholes. And the ACLU supports all of those. So the first is to section B2A. The addition would be to append the words, so long as such evidence was not generated by or at the request of Boston or any Boston official, at the end of that section.
What was the loophole that they felt they were covering with that? Or do you feel is being covered by that?
So it might help to give a little bit of background about why this exemption exists in the first place. We, as many of you know, have been through this process of passing face surveillance bans in 5 Massachusetts municipalities. And our work in Brookline was really helpful because the chief of police there was very engaged in the process and suggested a number of changes based on his concerns about how the original language could have impeded routine police work that has nothing to do with the Brookline Police Department's use of this technology. One of those is addressed in that section, in that exemption, that first exemption. And essentially, it boils down to things like wanted posters. So for example, the FBI or another agency in another state or somewhere else in Massachusetts may send a wanted poster or a be on the lookout alert to a law enforcement official in Boston that has a picture and a name of someone the police are looking for. It is impractical to ask the Boston Police Department to follow up with every single originating agency of an alert like that to determine whether or not that alert came from, any of the information in that alert came from the use of facial recognition technology. So that first amendment, that first exception rather, is meant to address that concern. So we're not asking the Boston Police Department to, call the FBI every time they get a wanted poster and ask if the name on that poster came from the use of facial recognition technology or facial surveillance technology. EFF's amendment is meant to ensure that that exemption does not create a giant loophole that would enable the Boston Police Department to use facial surveillance technology itself. So it merely adds a clause that says, as long as essentially the BPD didn't ask somebody to provide that information based on face recognition surveillance. So we think that's an important amendment.
Okay. Anybody have an immediate response or concern about that language? Raise your hand.
Sorry, ma'am, Deputy Miller here. I didn't raise my hand, but we think that's fair and we do agree with that. We think that's beneficial for all parties.
Excellent. Thank you. Would you like to go on with the Second Amendment?
Yes. So the second issue is just clarity on enforcement. The ordinance as it stands provides that a violation of the ordinance constitutes an injury and that any person may institute proceedings for injunctive relief, declaratory relief, or a writ of mandate in any court of competent jurisdiction to enforce the ordinance. That's fancy lawyer speak for saying you can initiate a civil action. You can sue if your rights are violated. EFF suggested that we add a sentence to the end of that line that says a court shall award costs and reasonable attorney's fees to a plaintiff who is the prevailing party in such proceedings. That's important because it ensures that organizations like the ACLU that have money and lawyers are not the only parties that can enforce their rights. So that ordinary Bostonians or visitors to the city who don't have money to hire lawyers can enforce their rights as well.
Yeah. Anybody? And colleagues? I understand that's actually very typical for a lot of civil rights legislation to assure that people aren't, only rich people who can hire an attorney can actually enforce their rights. No back and forth on that. Well, if you'd like to go into the Third Amendment.
Yes, thank you, Counselor. So the Third Amendment is basically meant to address First Amendment concerns. So the language in section B1C is meant to prohibit Boston from essentially granting a permit to a private entity to perform face surveillance on city property. And EFF suggests that we add a few words on behalf of Boston or any Boston official to ensure that this ordinance doesn't run up against someone's First Amendment rights to use the technology independent of the city's request. So we support that as well.
Let me be clear. You're limiting who the ban applies to with this.
Well, sort of. So the idea, the impetus for this, it may be helpful to give a little bit of a historical backstory here. The impetus for this piece of the ordinance is something very troubling that happened a number of years back when the Boston Police Department entered into a secret agreement with IBM, the computer corporation, the software corporation, to authorize IBM to conduct a face surveillance experiment, basically on attendees of the Boston Calling concert on Government Center Plaza. This was disclosed by some journalists at, I believe it was the Dig at the time who reported this. And so we just wanted to make sure that nothing in the ordinance allowed the city of Boston essentially to join forces with a private entity to perform face surveillance in public. And so that's what the section is meant to address. And we are comfortable with EFF's suggestion that we limit that section to basically areas where the Boston Police Department or other city agencies are involved in those operations.
So what it would do essentially is prevent maybe BHA, Boston Housing Authority, from using it, as well as BPD and anybody who works or is doing it on behalf of the city of Boston. What it wouldn't prevent is Lydia Edwards, assume I'm not a public official, entering into an agreement with IBM on my own property and having facial recognition.
That's correct.
It seems like it wouldn't also prevent me from doing the exact same thing and violating other people's properties. Boston Calling.
Yeah, I mean,
I say that only not to as a criticism. I think maybe to acknowledge the issue of privacy rights or individuals vis-a-vis the government.
That's right. Yeah, so that is what this ordinance is meant to address. The ACLU and our partners have very serious concerns about commercial use of biometric surveillance technologies as well, which is why we are supportive of laws like Illinois' Biometric Information Privacy Act, which require that any commercial entity must obtain your written consent. So that is not scrolling down the terms of service and clicking I agree to access Facebook. it is actually writing down on a piece of paper physically, I consent to Facebook taking my biometric data. So we strongly believe that Massachusetts ought to have a law like that. And we would be very interested in having conversations with the city council to try to pass a citywide ordinance to that effect as well. This ordinance specifically is meant to deal with government.
Thank you. Any discussion, any thoughts in reaction to the third amendment? Any opposition to it?
Ma'am, if I might speak up for a moment. Sorry, this is David Carabin from Boston Police Department. So this is the first time that any of us have had an opportunity to view these amendments. Is this a typical course that that a project like this would take, where we're going to agree to amendments that have been put in front of us for the first time right this moment, or should we have an opportunity to review them, digest them before accepting them in to the record?
So the typical course of how we pass ordinances is that, one, we have a hearing, which we did, and we discuss all concerns, opposition, thoughts, suggestions, everything. At that time, this was presented. It was presented to the committee, these suggested amendments, and they were also folks testified about them specifically. We asked lots of questions about them, what they would do, what they wouldn't do. The lead sponsors specifically go back and forth as well. We had that hearing. I want to say it was, I took us three and a half hours-ish, and then I had to catch a plane, and then Councilor Wu drove it home. And so we had that robust hearing, more than 100 people. We actually almost broke Zoom with the amount of people who were interested in the conversation. At that point, after you have the conversation and a hearing, typical process then moves to a working session, which is what we're having now. And it's limited the yay or nays and really getting down to the conversation. Unless the nays are specifically talking about language, I tend to really want to get down into the soup, or into the nuts and bolts of the ordinance. And then we, again, further discuss, get down, ask for amendments. My colleagues and I ask plenty of questions. We go through all of the concerns. That's what we're doing now. And then I see you, Councilor Mejia. And then after that, we can either continue to another working session, or if there's agreement on the final language, it's presented in front of the city council, and then there's a final vote, up or down. So we're in the middle of, I specifically recall Commissioner Gross asking for a working session, and that's what I'm doing. Councilor Mejia, did you want to respond to?
I don't want to respond. I wanted to just ask I just wanted to ask a question or make a recommendation about the amendment. Yeah.
Very well. Yep.
So I'm just really curious, and maybe this was probably 3 amendments ago, but I want to really just make sure that we're putting in some factors around accountability and how we're going to hold ourselves accountable to this ordinance. I'm just curious about what that looks like, and I want to just continue to uplift how important it is to expand this. I know that this is specifically around the Boston Police Department and Boston City, but I'm just curious, again, what opportunities exist, if any, to ensure that we're protecting residents no matter where they end up. Because I worry about folks who are undocumented. There's some issues. I'm just really curious about if we are able to utilize this time to really hash that out.
Councilor, if I may, I can speak to that. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. We share those concerns. And just to be clear, this ordinance covers every single City of Boston agency and employee. So it's not limited to the Boston Police Department.
But it's just the employees. I'm concerned about the residents. I'm talking about everybody, all 700,000 people that live in the city of Boston. Like, does it protect all of those folks?
It protects everyone from the city of Boston's use of this technology, yes.
Okay.
So just to be clear, so I'm understanding your question, are you asking about private use of the technology?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just thinking about what that would look like. I understand that we have to be really super careful about other businesses potentially using it because we can only regulate the city of Boston. But I'm just curious, like, let's say, for instance, if a salon has facial recognition and their, business, people are walking by, is there, I don't know how this technology works and I don't know how much they can capture, but I'm just worried about it just manifesting in other ways. I'm just curious about that.
Council, you're right to be concerned. We share those concerns. This ordinance does not address those concerns, just to be clear. We are limiting it again to government conduct because a hair salon, while it can spy on you at one location in the city, does not have the capacity as the Boston Police Department out networks of surveillance cameras across the entire city, which is a very serious concern that we have at the ACLU. The other reason that we are
Is anyone else losing Kate's testimony?
Kate, we lost you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, sorry about that. So I'm not sure where I dropped off, but I'll say that there are two primary reasons why we at the ACLU believe it's important to start with government conduct with this ordinance. The first is that while a hair salon or a gas station could indeed use this technology at its place of business, or a private citizen could use it at their home, they can't track people throughout the city. So the Boston Police Department, the Boston Public Schools, the Boston Housing Authority, they have networks of surveillance cameras that enable, for example, the police to track someone from my neighborhood, and there's a camera not very far away from my house, all the way downtown. And then frankly, all the way even into Quincy and into Revere and into Brookline, because there's actually a regional network of surveillance that is maintained.
Am I the only one losing her?
Regional Intelligence Center. So it's that scale surveillance major.
Just coming in and out.
Okay,
Yeah.
is that better?
Maybe turn the
I'm
video
so sorry.
off.
Maybe you could
All right,
take.
let me turn off my video.
That's
Okay.
right.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry. So I'm not sure where you lost me, but essentially there's a network of surveillance cameras, not just in Boston, but actually around the metropolitan region, in Quincy, in Revere, in Winthrop, in Somerville, in Brookline, that could enable this software being used to track people not only as they move throughout the city of Boston on that network of surveillance cameras, but actually throughout the entire metropolitan region. So that is a very serious concern that is not raised by one hair salon using the technology at one location in the city. The second reason why we're starting with taking on government surveillance here is very simple. The Boston Public Schools are a place that students are required to go. You have to go to school. You have no choice for young people, right? And the Boston Police Department has the unique power in the city to deprive people of their liberty and actually even to use force, to use violence against people. So as a result of that, government conduct in the ACLU's view rises to a level that requires immediately dealing with this surveillance technology. Like I said, though, we would welcome the opportunity to, in a subsequent ordinance, look at regulating commercial use of this technology in the city as well.
And thank you for indulging me in this again a little bit further, but it was really helpful to understand the context of which, why we're moving in the direction that we are, so that in case people ask me, I know how to respond. So thank you so much for that.
You're very welcome.
We've also been joined by Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Arroyo, I didn't know if you had any, as one of the lead sponsors, if you had any comments or thoughts that you wanted to.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So first, I just want to apologize for being late. I had a family issue that I did not foresee happening today, so I had to deal with that. but I'm here and everything is good now. I just want to say Yasmin has been on here, my policy director, and so I've gotten updates as this has gone on, so I feel kind of caught up and up to speed. But I just want to say thank you to everybody here for working through this. I see my colleagues here. I want to thank Councilor Michelle Wu for being here as well. And I understand that we're now at the part of the program with ACLU amendments.
Correct.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And so that's basically all I want to say. I just appreciate everybody's support and work on this. And I'm just here to make sure that I don't derail or make this any longer than it has to be. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. We were also responding, I think there was a question about process and notice and having access to these documents. So I forgot to mention, once they're part of the official record, they're sent out in advance, and they should have been sent out. And I believe, and I can confirm with Christine, who is our the committee attorney, that they were sent out to the administration, which then subsequently would be responsible for making sure any suggested amendments, any documents were also passed on to the BPD. So in any event, if there are any other additional thoughts about these three amendments, and I've been corrected, actually, Christine sent them to the counselors, but they were presented, and we did have public discourse about these amendments beforehand. So we can go on to, I think there's two, I'm getting text messages, sorry. So they were sent to actually Neil. I don't know if Neil's on the phone or Neil's here to confirm, either way. So we'll go on to the two suggested adjustments, or two suggested concerns that the BPD has with regards to how they can do their job and have this amendment, or have this ordinance. So I think it was Detective Miller who was discussing the two things that they need. Detective Miller.
Yes, ma'am, it's Deputy Miller. Again, our concern is with the software we're going to use, not using the facial recognition proportion of it. We want to use it for object recognition, for vehicles and articles of clothing. We'd also consider, and I think would be very beneficial to us, would be the video summary portion of it, which can essentially cut down large portions of unused video, surveillance video we use. So if it's an 8-hour video, we can knock it down to 10 minutes. That would, I think, would be much more effective of our time and our money. Again, both of those components would not be using facial recognition.
Does anyone have a response or concern or question about that?
Madam Chair, may I? This is Councilor Wu. Just curious, given that the amendments were requested ahead of time, could you, if there is any specific language that you are looking to offer? Sorry, and by you, I mean generally anyone at BPD. Thank you.
No, ma'am, we're just trying to clarify, is that something you have a problem with? Or we understand the facial recognition proportion of it, and we want to have this healthy conversation about it, but we want to be clear, are you okay with the object recognition and the video summary? Because the software encompasses a lot.
I think if I may clarify for folks who are watching what this discussion is about. I believe you're discussing the overall contract, right, with BriefCam, and that is
it's the license, ma'am, software, not so much the
me.
contract, but the license issued.
Thank you. That is being discussed, and the question is making sure, or assuring, that the proposed ordinance doesn't prevent two aspects of that license: object recognition and video summary. I don't know
exactly.
Okay, I don't know based on the language proposed right now in this ordinance that it actually opposes or stops those two functions right now.
Yeah, that's correct. It does not. So I think we're actually talking about maybe something slightly different, which is more of an operational issue of if the only software that BPD is looking to sort of most easily upgrade to has facial recognition, that software would be banned by the ordinance because we cannot, because there would be no way to just have you sort of voluntarily agree to not use a portion of the software. So the technology itself in terms of the software purchasing would be banned by the ordinance. But there, I assume, and again, maybe I'll defer to experts here, there would be other types of software that could do similar things, including object recognition and video summaries that would not have facial recognition. Or sorry, face surveillance.
Now, if the BPD has a response.
Ma'am, I believe Shawn Romanowski's on, who could speak more about the software and the availability of others, but we're just, with this software itself, the license would enable us to turn off that portion. But like I said, Shawn Romanowski can probably speak further on that than I could.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
So yes, within what we call, the brief cam that we've been discussing, there are many features within that. And we understand that the primary concern here is facial recognition. Facial recognition is an add-on module which needs a separate license in order to operate. So what we're requesting is that we continue to operate brief cam, or we don't even operate. However, what we're concerned with is that by attaching facial recognition to brief cam, we may inadvertently remove some very key pieces of software that the department is taking advantage of, such as video summary, where it removes everything from the background from repeating, and it shortens the video to minutes from hours because of the volume of video that an individual would have to view. Weeks going through the video, where this will take an hour's worth of video and typically cut it down to 4 to 6 minutes. In some instances, if it's a nighttime video, you can cut it down to seconds. So we want to remove the discussion of facial recognition from the rest of the brief cam product.
If I understand correctly, Councilor Wu's comments is that the license or the software to be introduced includes many different options. There is a facial recognition component of that, or face surveillance component of the brief cam license. And this, if I understand you, Councilor Wu, correctly, this ordinance would ban the entire brief cam license? No, says Kade. Councilor Wu or Kade?
I think it really depends on what our BPD leadership is saying here when they say you can turn off that portion of the license. If it means turn off, meaning that the vendor will just make it unavailable to all BPD and you'll never be able to access it, then that it seems to fit just fine with the ordinance. But if I turn off, it just means, I don't know, there'll be a special password or someone that it's included and there's no way for the access to be shut off, but we just won't use it voluntarily, then that would not be allowed by the ordinance. But it doesn't feel that the disagreement or even the conversation that we're having now is really about questioning anything with the ordinance's language, more just operationalizing it. So, but I think it would be helpful just for us to understand, because we want to get past the ordinance to making sure it's actually implemented, what turn off means and how that will, if BPD is upgrading, can you upgrade to a version that does not include access to face surveillance whatsoever?
Yes, to your question, we can upgrade without providing any access to facial recognition. That is a standalone product that would actually have to be added on, and there's a second license. We would not even be in receipt of that second license. Therefore,
got it.
It would be impossible to operate.
And the original license includes the pieces that you were just mentioning in terms of object recognition and video summaries?
That is correct. The new product is the facial recognition portion. The other was the area of expertise for brief cam is video summary, and that's what we were primarily focusing on.
Thank you. That helps a lot for me. I mean, I'm sure I defer in terms of technological expertise to Kade as well. So I'd be interested to see what they think.
Ma'am, it's Deputy Miller again, Councilwoman. I just wanted to put on record that we are not using this right now, specifically because of our concerns with facial recognition. Okay, yes. I just want to put that on record.
Thank you. That was also testified by Commissioner Gross as well, that it's not used, it is not ready to be used, it's not up to the standards of the BPD. That is very clear. We think that. Thank you for reiterating that.
Superintendent Wilson of the BRIC, may I add something, please?
Yes.
Just for future consideration, it's abundantly clear we don't use facial recognition, but for future use, I think it should be considered a possibility that facial recognition could be very beneficial to things that are victim focused, a missing person, an endangered person, someone who, like a couple of cases that I was personally involved in where girls were missing. We know who they were, we know what they looked like, but we had little else to go on. If we were able to use facial recognition down the road when it becomes a more reliable source, that might be something you might want to at least consider to come back into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like to respond, Kade, to the technological component, and then I also think there might actually be some exemptions that address the concern about victims and children actually in the ordinance.
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, another concern that was, well, I'll start with the technology. The ordinance as written and as amended, as you know, with the amendments that we've been discussing, prohibits the Boston Police Department and every other city agency and official from possessing facial surveillance technology. So I'm very happy to hear from the BPD that it is possible to continue to use BriefCam without using a license that provides face surveillance capabilities, because that's required in order to comply with this ordinance. On the question of missing persons, I'll say two things about that. First is that there is no state or federal law governing how government can use this technology at the moment. That's very troubling, and it ought not to be used ever, absent civil rights and civil liberties protections enshrined by statute. So we are working at the state level right now on Beacon Hill to try to pass a statewide moratorium on government use that would prompt, we hope, bringing law enforcement officials, civil rights advocates, and others to the table to discuss what, if any, possible regulations ought to look like for the future. But certainly the Boston Police Department and every other agency should not be using this technology if it's not regulated. It's too dangerous. The second issue is a little bit more philosophical, and that is that in the United States, since the founding or shortly thereafter when the Bill of Rights was established, we have decided collectively that there are certain things that the government can't do, even if it would make solving crimes easier. Certainly, it would be easier for the Boston Police Department to solve crimes if they didn't have to get a warrant before searching someone's home. We have decided that that is an unacceptable intrusion, that the balance of power between the government and the people is best respected when there are certain limitations on the government's power. And it is the ACLU's view, as well as the view of our coalition partners, that this particular technology, especially when used to analyze video data, either in real time or historically, goes well beyond what that appropriate balance of power would look like. Finally, I'll just say that, yes, when we engaged in this process in Brookline, the chief of police there raised the National Child Search Assistance Act and some concerns that the Brookline Police Department would not be able to comply with that if we did not add an exemption allowing them to comply with that specific federal law. And that's why that final exemption is included in the package before you.
Thank you. And I also, one of the other points that came up in the last working session was, because this is a matter of law and process, there's nothing stopping one day the Boston Police Department or any Boston City department from seeking an additional exemption or amendment to this ordinance. It would allow for the open discussion and pros and cons analysis of us as a city, which I think is making us more democratic and also helping us to be at the table to determine how we want to be watched. And I think that that's okay. But there's, again, nothing in here stops an amendment one day saying that if, for example, the BPD or Boston City Department says the technology is finally good enough, and then having to start that process.
Is there anything built into exigency?
Could you repeat,
exigency? This Superintendent Wilson, is there anything built into this that addresses exigency?
I'm not sure what that means.
Well, exigent circumstances, something that would require immediate use of this technology in the future that wouldn't be practical to go through a normal process. You know, an exigent circumstance would be something very out of the ordinary, but something that was needed in the advance of public safety. Is there something in there that would allow the police department in the future to utilize this technology without the process for a specific stated purpose?
I will answer, and then I see Kate has a question or to also answer. So this ordinance is not, no, it doesn't provide a future one-day exemption to be considered. It is a present day. The technology is not here. And therefore, and no one, including the BPDA, is used, or excuse me, BPD just had a long working session with the BPDA. The Boston Police Department is not using it. So presently, we are not going to allow for it. Again, that conversation for the future and whether that technology is ready in the future can happen in the future when either the Boston Police Department or any person in the city of Boston wishes to use it or have the capability in the city of Boston. Kate?
Thanks, Counselor. I was going to say something very similar. I will just add that as multiple experts testified to, machine learning experts, experts who have audited facial analysis algorithms looking for racial and gender bias, this technology is not ready for prime time, and that won't change if there's exigent circumstances. It is also not regulated, and that will not change until the state legislature or Congress acts. The other issue, I think, that needs to be raised in response to that question is that federal agencies, including the FBI, DHS, are not bound by this ordinance. And so I've heard some concerns voiced from members of the Boston Police Department, like the one that we just heard from the Deputy Superintendent about, you know, one-off horrific events, for example, the Boston Marathon bombing. This ordinance does not tie the hands of any federal law enforcement, does not tie the hands of the state police. It is merely restricting Boston agency use of this technology.
Any other questions? I can go through the colleagues or thoughts or suggestions. If I'm clear, this ordinance would ban facial recognition, but doesn't actually prevent this, the BPD from getting or accessing the two things that they just mentioned, object recognition and time, speeding up the time, or what is it? Video summary, excuse me. And because they simply do not need to opt in for the license for facial recognition. So you can have and continue the brief cam contract and get those two things and not enter into a contract with brief cam for the facial recognition if this ordinance passes. I'm trying to make sure I'm very clear, or that's my understanding of what would happen if this passes, you simply would go on and enter your contract and just not opt into the facial recognition license.
I think Shawn answered that. Shawn, can you jump on that, please?
You know, we can certainly do that. We certainly can eliminate the facial recognition portion of that. The one thing that was said is several times I've heard it's a possibility to open it up when it gets good enough. The one thing that I want to bring up is that even though I just don't want anyone to ever believe that the Boston Police Department would take a single piece of information such as a facial recognition to do any form of action, because the facial recognition is typically only one tiny tool in a case. So we use many types of technologies. You know, even a witness statement, we would never, I mean, I can't say never, but that is only one piece in building a case. So the original, I think, purpose of the brief cam was only to give an additional tool. That's not something that we would, you know, we don't arrest people because the license plate recognition system. There's a number on it, but that number has to be verified because the number could be used in all 50 states. So if it's license plate 123, before any action is taken, we have to verify many pieces to just include that one piece of information. And that's why I don't want anyone to think that it would have to be at 100% accuracy and then we would take action if it was. Right now, the intent across most law enforcement agencies is it's only one small piece of information in a big, and it sometimes gives you, you know, a lead or a place to look. So when I hear that in the future we may be able to request access to that, such as circumstances, I just don't want anyone, you know, to hold to the standard that this technology must be 100% accurate. Because as we all know, if you cover up one eye of an individual, that will significantly change it. By putting on certain makeups will change it. So we're fully aware that makeup, face mask, glasses, covered eye, all of these things will negatively impact the accuracy of that. We respect that.
So I guess I want to be very clear. If the ordinance passes with the suggested amendments from Councilor Arroyo and from from EFF and the ACLU, if it passes and therefore the ban is implemented, you can enter into your contract with BriefCam and just not have a license for facial recognition.
Yes, I understand. As it is proposed, okay. That's the intent. Yep.
Okay. So that seems to. And were there other issues or concerns or technological things that you wanted to make sure were not hindered by this ban?
I personally believe that there should be some availability for exigent circumstances. And I can't tell you what those are. I mean, we all know the hypotheticals, such as the Boston Marathon. That is one hypothetical. I believe that there's a place in the middle where we have some sort of, intense checks and balances. My concern is if something significant were to happen, and that if we were to have that technology, be it locked up in a cabinet, that needs signatures or what have you, I think it could be a very useful tool in protecting the citizens at large. And that's the one thing. And I'm a technologist. I'm not part of the policy. So from my perspective, we can make those things happen where we meet all of the requirements or these incredibly, whether it's, the signature of the commissioner or something. I believe that it would be in everyone's interest to have that secret tool in the background that is only used under exigent circumstances. So if we were to say, yes, we need this tool immediately, it would literally take me weeks to implement such a system. You have to build workstations and apply licenses and get the data or bring the data in. And so from my perspective, even if there was only one in the entire city, one unit in the entire city that had this capability for exigent circumstances, I think that it's a key tool that we don't want to take away. And we all recognize that it has bias built in, it has errors built in, and it's not 100%, but it's that 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 cases where it may be the deciding piece of information to that puzzle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So it is a working session, and I do know some folks who aren't formal panelists may have some thoughts. and may have some suggestions as well. I didn't know if they wanted to take this opportunity to offer suggestions, concerns, or thoughts. Looking at Sabrina, Emiliano. I also know that there's a Jennifer and other members of the BPD who also haven't spoken today. If you want to raise your blue hand or just go ahead and say your name, you're free to kind of give opinions or thoughts or concerns on this.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Sabrina Rosso. I'm the lead organizer for the Student Immigrant Movement. I want to say thank you to everyone for everyone's contribution to this conversation. This is a very important matter. I just wanted to bring some perspective that I'm coming with and like the story of the people that I work with. So, you know, I hear all the words from the folks at the BPD. Thank you so much for also joining this conversation today. And, you know, I really respect these concerns. And one of the concerns that I would like to raise just as a community member is the fact that, you know, for undocumented folks, they are being looked for right now, right? ICE is out looking in particular for people who are undocumented. So when we think about surveillance, you know, of course, we are concerned about being able to address these concerns in our communities in regards to crimes and being able to support folks who are victims of crimes. However, I think it's important to raise the note that, as you said, right, you know, even perhaps if one unit is put in a part of the city, it's capturing everyone. And, you know, that's the sort of thing that does really worry undocumented folks in our communities and immigrants at large and activists, right? Because, you know, it is actually, it does actually happen to undocumented folks. They are targeted, and we already know, right, from incidences that we've already been able to experience without facial recognition, right, that information will be shared about undocumented folks. And so when, you know, the community doesn't have access, and this was a question that we were actually able to hear and actually talk about, was like, you know, this video footage or this type of technology is really only hands of law enforcement, right? So the community, where do we get security in knowing like, okay, yeah, that would be used in that one case or this one scenario, when we know that there's a full active agency that is looking to separate our people and our communities. So I just wanted to bring that up as a point to really stress the fact that this really comes down to talking about residents and the people who live in Boston, families and young people having knowledge, having a full and transparent communication with the institutions at hand that they deal with every single day. So, you know, I think like Councilor Wu had mentioned, some of these things are going to be more operational, and it's a conversation around that. And, you know, larger for us to think about is the importance of the transparency that we have with our communities, and being able to say, you know, we would use this technology for this reason, and us being able to say, actually, no, because we know that right at large, it's not used that way for everyone. And like the risks are different for different populations and groups of people. And so, right, like that doesn't always come down to voting constituency or folks, right, who have that privilege. This comes down to really protecting our people. And so those are that's the perspective that I wanted to raise today. Thank you all so much for being here and for talking about this.
Thank you, Sabrina. I see Shawn has a raised hand. Shawn?
Sabrina, you brought up something that I want to thank you for. I completely miss something in this whole discussion. What you're referencing is called an active system. The Boston Police has never even discussed an active system. What you're discussing is a camera system, a system that is online that views every camera and then makes an analysis on that. We use it in a very in an inactive situation. How it works for us is every camera doesn't get put into it. If we're looking for a specific event, what happens is you grab a piece of video footage. So let's say it's from a camera or somebody's cell phone. And what we do is we put that video in because we're looking for something very specific, some event, be it a 911 call, a police report, something happened to make us look. Once we look, we then say, does anyone have imagery, for example? That's when we would take it, and if it was believed that it was a piece of video that was in the possession of the Boston Police Department, or if it was at a store, we'd have a unit go out and get this video from the store. We then bring that in, and then that is the only video that goes into the facial recognition system. We would be a completely inactive. So the hundreds of thousands of hours of recorded video, much greater than 99% of it goes in the trash and is never viewed. And even a much smaller percentage of that would ever be run through an active system. So this would be an event that made us look, would be the only time it would go into a facial recognition system. These things are not active by any enormous amount of processing power. These things are expensive. We're not looking for that, nor would anyone in the police department. So, and I apologize, Sabrina. I was thinking this whole time from an inactive system rather than an active system.
Thank you, Shawn. I see Kade's raised her hand.
Thanks, Counselor. I just wanted to quickly address what Shawn just said. I'm happy to hear that there's no active use of BriefCam across the camera network. That's news to me. That said, the purpose of this democratic process is to enshrine in the law, in a legal protection, an assurance that no city agency will use this technology, whether it's inactive or active. As we know, elections can surprise us. Sometimes people are put in positions of power where they make decisions that run contrary to informal agreements that people have made. And that's why we believe law is critical to ensuring these protections for future residents of the city of Boston.
Thank you. Sabrina, very briefly, and then unless I hear, and I really want to keep the comments also on the language, right? So go ahead, Sabrina. And I didn't know if anyone else had, I'm still looking, I look for raised hands all the time. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Thank you so much. Yes, briefly, I just wanted to say that, yes, and I think that, this comes even down to transparency, right? Like a lot of the reports that I've seen are not clear on exactly what people are looking for, right? The observations I've seen are about really minor and things that should not be looked for. And so I'm speaking to the reports that I've seen that end up in the hands of ICE, right? And so if that's what we refer to as I see something or how that applies, right? I'm just asking that there's there's no transparency on that even, right? So we actually wouldn't know. So that's what I'm trying to say, that this effort is to put that in the hands of the community.
Thank you. So at this point, we have, from what I understand, Ricardo Arroyo's amendment, which is more technical and changing the name, of which I didn't hear much or any opposition. We have 3 clarifying, narrowing amendments from EFF, represented and the ACLU, of which I did not hear much or any opposition or concern. And then we have 2 particular technological resources that the BPDA said that BPD, Boston Police Department, said that they need, which include the object recognition and the video summary. And per our working session, we realized this ban on facial surveillance would not hinder the BPD's ability to have both of those. It would impact only the license that they enter into, and they wouldn't just opt in or wouldn't enter into a license that included facial recognition or facial surveillance.
So could we get the language amended to say BriefCam is allowed with the exception of facial recognition? Would that be sufficient?
In the ordinance, you would like the language that says BriefCam is allowed?
With the exception of facial recognition.
I think I'm happy to work on language, but I think that's the how the ordinance works. We wouldn't specifically talk about any contract, first of all, private contract that you can enter, because brief can become Johnny can become Lydia can become, so we wouldn't name anybody privately. And if you want specific language that says the BPD may enter into a license that does not include facial recognition or facial surveillance as a specific point.
Yes, that
would be more clear.
Yes, that would. Thank you.
Superintendent Wilson, could we?
Oh, go ahead. Or concerns?
Superintendent Wilson, perhaps we can say object recognition, because that's what brief cam is, right? And video summary. So we don't have to name brief cam, because brief cam is the name of the system, but we can mention what it's for, or what the purpose is for. So perhaps we can name it that way, right in the facial recognition language.
So essentially, because we have a list of, this doesn't apply to this, doesn't apply to this, doesn't apply to this. If you want, or would you want just simply that says this should not be interpreted to ban object recognition and video summary?
That sounds good to me. I'm just speaking for myself. If anybody else from BPD wants to weigh in, that sounds good.
Ma'am, Deputy Miller here.
Yep. I'm just trying to clarify, by the way, what you guys want for language, and then I see people have their hands. Go ahead.
Ma'am, I just respectfully request to be able to review these amendments over the weekend. We can get back to you in writing on Monday. Would that be reasonable?
Well, yes.
With the language we prefer.
Oh, for you to get your suggested language in, or a response to the amendments?
Well, we respond to the amendments and get our suggested language in.
I will to the maker, Councillor Wu.
I mean, is it possible? I don't know if you all can access the chat box since you're on your phone or anything, but I assume that Neil Doherty might have your email addresses or some way to get you the amendment language that he already has. Would it be possible just to quickly send over that email now so we can just clarify what we've already been talking about throughout this session?
No, ma'am, we don't have that ability right now. We prefer to look over them at length.
Very well. I'm going to think and just turn over to Kade real quick.
Okay, we'd be looking at Monday, probably around noon, like I said, so we can review the amendments and provide you some language we'd prefer.
Thanks, Counselor. So I just have a quick process question, and I also wanted to raise a concern about adding any language authorizing the use of surveillance into this ordinance. The ACLU would have a problem with that. There's nothing in the ordinance that prevents the BPD from using brief cam's object recognition, so it seems superfluous, and I'm confused about why it would be necessary. And then on the process question, my understanding is that if the Boston Police Department requests amendments or opposes the amendments that EFF and the ACLU have suggested, or that Councilor Arroyo has suggested, that we would be required to have another working session. And I just want to get clear on that. And I also just want to be clear on the fact that these amendments have been public and accessible to the BPD for at least 48 hours. Is that correct?
That the question to me or to them? We noticed the hearing, and I believe the documents were delivered to our liaison, or the person in the city, Neil Doherty, who then is our connection to folks in the administration. So it goes to Neil, and then it goes to other folks. Councillor Wu suggested.
Sorry, Councilor, to the process question, if the Boston Police Department did suggest further amendments to the ordinance, we would be required to have another working session prior to the council voting on the ordinance, or no? I'm just confused on the process.
Not required to have working sessions. Additional.
Thank you.
And to your other question, we just received these ones at 2:35 this afternoon, so we have not.
I just want to note also, in terms of the notice, right after the hearing, we did have a public notice. So every Wednesday we have a public conversation wherein I summarized the amendments suggested and the entire conversation. So that was also during our regular Wednesday meeting. And I believe it was in the committee report that we filed publicly.
Yeah, Deputy Miller, ma'am, that is on us. That's our fault. But we do request respectfully to review these. We don't even know if we're forward any changes. We just like to review them, and we just respectfully request Monday by noon to look at them, if that's at all permissible.
You certainly have the opportunity, by virtue of time, of course, to review any amendment and make suggestions. And also, if you have a opposition or concern, for example, if the council wants to vote on this on Wednesday, they, by virtue of process, and this is to answer Kade's question as well, they can also propose, not they, but a counselor can also propose amendments on the floor.
Thank you, that's helpful.
So it would be great, essentially, if the BPD would get their response. And I think it's very important at this point, that if the response is, you know, if you oppose the amendments, as opposed to if you have certain language that you would like in them, I think that that's a little different. And also if you have your own separate amendments that you would like to see in the ordinance, if you're going to get them to us by Monday, you are free to get them to us by Monday. But I'm not guaranteeing that there will be continued manipulation, except maybe on the floor on Wednesday.
Thank you, ma'am. And just to be clear, we're not asking for manipulations. We just want to be thorough in what we're doing and what we're presenting.
Understood. Understood.
And Madam Chair, I can, if I may, I just wanted to add, I think it sounds like all BPD is asking for is just for at least the sponsors and the chair to just be on the lookout Monday at a certain time frame. So I'll make sure I check my email, and hopefully, I don't know how we're going to get it, if it's going to go through the chair to us or through Neil, but I can pledge that I'll be available for a window to take a look and offer feedback back on that as well before our meeting on Wednesday.
Yes, ma'am, we'll get that to Neil if that works for everyone.
And just to let you, yes, and I appreciate the back and forth and getting that information. So I will look forward to that. Unless there are any other remarks or conclusions or concerns to be expressed in this working session from my colleagues. If any of them have any concluding remarks, Councillor Wu.
No, thank you everyone for your time.
And Councillor Flynn has told me he had to leave. Councillor Breadon had to leave. Councillor Bach has returned, or has been here the whole time. She just turned the camera on.
I've been here. I have, in fact.
I'm not trying to stop. Sorry. Okay, Councillor Breadon also. What? Okay. All right. Well, let's do order.
I haven't.
Councillor Arroyo also. I'm not sure. Okay. So Councillor Breadon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been listening in. I've been here all the time. I switched off my camera because it was interfering with reception, but this has been a very productive conversation, and I appreciate the amendments, thoughtful and well-considered amendments. So I look forward to seeing the final document next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley, Councillor Mejia, Councillor Bach.
Just my thanks to all involved, and also, yes, I've been here the whole time, so thanks.
Didn't know if I heard Councillor Arroyo.
Yes, I'm here, and I have not been here the whole time. I'm sorry I showed up late. So I'll watch the video to make sure that I pick up everything that I missed. I did have staff watching and updating me, and so I have a general gist of where we're at. And similar to Councilor Wu, if BPD sends over an email, I'll keep an eye open for it. I'll take a look at it. I can try to set aside. It sounds like by noon on Monday, so I'll try and pay attention around then and see what's going on. Otherwise, I just want to thank everybody for being here the whole time, because otherwise this wouldn't have been able to move. So thank you so much for y'all for the work that you're doing in advancing this, and I look forward to seeing the final product on the floor.
Thank you. Councilor Wu, I think we're going to address the same thing.
Okay, you go for it then.
Yeah. So to the Boston Police Department, just based off of the way our timing is and how we file our reports, if you can actually get it to us by Monday at 9 o'clock, your suggestions, and that actually then becomes formally part of the whole record and conversation, and then it's part of the whole package that can be delivered to the council. If that would actually significantly help the process. So by Monday at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, ma'am, that's no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wu, was that the?
That's all, you got it.
Okay, well, thank you all for spending your Friday afternoon with us. And we appreciate the back and forth, and I would honestly say I appreciate the respectful back and forth, and being able to discuss a controversial and intense amendment or ordinance in such a respectful, directed, focused way. And I want to thank all parties for that. I think that's for some people, that's what's lacking in some cases nowadays. But in any event, thank you and have a good afternoon. This working session is closed.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.